Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to view Smallville Season 2, Episodes 18 and 19. So, I honestly feel like this episode is trying very hard to give us something different, but, like, when you go on and you do that, you're kind of realizing that, like, man, this show is not really what it was. Especially when they keep consistently doing that every single episode, where it's like they're going like further and further from like the formula of the show, and they're honestly giving episodes that are just like ugh, like this feels like filler, or this feels like it's an entertaining episode, but again, it doesn't feel like the show. Because honestly, episode 19 is a very entertaining show. I like what they do in this episode. I like the characters that they add. Where, like, the funny thing of it is, every time they introduce a replacement character for somebody in the past, it seems like they make that person way much a better story than the previous person, which freaking sucks. Because you go on, you had like Principal Quan, who like didn't have his time in the sun, but immediately when they introduced Principal Reynolds, which now they've kind of forgot that this character even exists, man, did they give him like some really like interesting story, and then like forgot about him. But it was like, man, like that one episode of that one principal was way better than anything that they did for Quan. And we go on and we have a new sheriff in episode 19, and that completely trumps everything that they ever did for the previous sheriff in 2 seasons of this guy consistently getting involved in the show. Me consistently seeing the sheriff, and I was like, yeah, like, why do they keep bringing in these replacement characters and making them look way better? Like, that just makes me like look at the previous number of episodes and just say, like, man, what crappy writing was done for certain characters. But anyways, so with that said, episode 18 is a deal with a character called Cyrus, who he is to claim that he is an alien. And so, if we really don't have episode 18, that just kind of feels like an interview going on, where we're having Clark, who has gone on to ask, normally Lana, it seems, like, well, hey, like, now that you were with this person and they had superpowers, like, how did you feel? Now we have to turn around and have Clark ask the question to Lana. It's like, well, hey, like, now that you found out this guy could have been an alien, how do you feel? And so Lana's like, well, I was scared. I was scared, Clark. So it seems like Clark is to more tiptoe into possibly at some point wanting to tell Lana his whole entire secret and see how she takes it. Possibly. That seems what we're building up at some point to do. So, but it feels so much like Clark is also putting feelers out for people. But so it seems that we are, within these 2 episodes, progressing the Lex and Helen relationship. But not only that, we're also focusing a little bit on Jonathan and Martha's relationship, but mostly to focus on Martha and her pregnancy still, as if you guys don't remember. Martha is to, of course, via the spaceship get predators, and so we have to kind of see when or how they'll use this story, or possibly forget about it, because it seems that they kind of sweep things under the rug at certain points or forget about certain things. So, but hey, when you go on and you have a show like this that is to kind of give us kind of like kind of episodes, so we of course have Clark, who is to further and further want to believe that Cyrus is to be an alien. And the more and more Clark and Cyrus start to talk, the more Clark is convinced that this Cyrus guy could be from Krypton. That it seems that both their stories kind of coincide with one another. And so Clark wants so badly, if we had the previous episode to tell us that Clark doesn't want to be alone, Clark now wants to just figure out that any person with powers could really just be another Kryptonian, which we won't really start to see that happening until way later in the show, where we just start having Clark chasing after Kryptonians or Phantom Zone characters, or whatever the heck ends up being the whole season story, that Clark has to kind of chase down certain characters and figure out who they are or where they're from, or if they're to have a certain element that isn't tied to a story and whatever. So, so in episode 19, we have an episode where we realize that Clark, who is to put the boots and fight crime, we start to realize that that does come at a cost. And this kind of brings me back to the old-fashioned Superman cartoons and stuff like that, where this episode has to go on and tell, like, the youngins, like, hey, just don't go on and, like, think that you can kind of get away with beating people up or seeking out your own justice. And so, like, this episode is to kind of be like, remember when the kids used to go on and put on the red capes and used to pretend that they would fly throughout their house, and they would injure themselves or they would hurt themselves, thinking that they can fly? Like, this is that same kind of episode, to just be like, hey kids, like, don't go on and, like, think you can just fight crime, because there's to be a cost to that you can go on and get sued and be out millions of dollars just because you went on and punched somebody in the face. But not only that, we have a Crouching Tiger, Hidden Street Fighter movie somewhere within Lana in this episode. If you guys do not know, the actress who, of course, was Lana in this movie went on at some point to do the movie Street Fighter, the remake thing that they did for some reason. It was a good attempt, but I didn't even watch it. Even though Krug was in that movie, I was just like, I don't really care to watch it. Anyways, so we turn around and have Lana, who is getting some combat training from Lex, which was like, yeah, give me some of that. Give me some of that, like, Lana just beating the crap out of just something. Give me something of that. Because we've had Lana like do some like spin kicks and stuff like that in previous episodes, but still. So, but not only that, we also have Helen, who is to have a creepy ex-boyfriend who is to be Paul Hayden, which a lot of people will probably know as Black Bolt from either the Inhumans show or to also know him from Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness, but I will also go on and say that he has played a plethora of different other things, like being in Star Trek, Strange New World. Yeah, I watched the pilot episode of that. I was like, like yeah, like they're really trying to change what Star Trek really is. Like right out of the gate, it just feels like they're just really focusing on like away missions, and I was like, I wasn't all that great. But anyways, I miss Star Trek Next Generation. I just do. But anyways, moving on. So, and Picard wasn't really helping. But moving on. So, we really, like, we have characters like Chloe that they kind of sprinkle in a little bit here, but I'm like, where is Pete? Where is Lionel? Where is where is a number of characters, because you realize that they're gone now. But I also do realize that there's certain other episodes where you would use certain characters heavily, and there's a reason why they're now gone. But still, it's like it's again kind of like the when Deadpool would go into the Xavier mansion and he would realize that there's only two X-Men there, and it's like, well, where are all the other X-Men? It feels like the studio couldn't budge on putting a number of different X-Men into the background. Why? What was the problem of that? Yeah, it just kind of comes off as that. So, anyways, let's just kind of go on and let's try to make our way into just the spoiler section of this. There's going to be a lot to pull away and to have me say. So, either way, by the bay. Let's go on into that double five time territory. Let's go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this episodes. So, in the beginning of this episode, we of course have everybody and the brother going to this like it looks like this workshop in this school, or this this certain kind of class that they're all going on and trying to make a orange or make a certain kind of fruit to be used as a battery. And we end up having Chloe, who's looking on at Pete and Clark, who are trying to use an orange. And we have Chloe, who ends up making this clockwork orange joke. And Pete is like, man, I bet you wish that you could have came up with that originally, right? That it wasn't already a film. So, like, if we can't actually go on and, like, do a Clockwork Orange episode theme, because, man, would that be weird, we have to go on and reference it. Because, again, this kind of tells us that, Tom Welling had said in of course, Talkville, he was to go on and say, like, well, yeah, like, we really in the show focused on, like, using movie references and film references to add into episodes. So it's like, well, that feels kind of obvious with them doing stuff like this. So all of a sudden we have Cyrus, who continues to go on and is to consistently trying to steal these plugins, and is to try to use it for his experiment to like charge up like his experiment. So, and everybody starts to get their feathers ruffled by this guy who's just kind of taking and stealing things, and they're just like, well, hey, like, we needed that too. And so Cyrus goes on and is to put fire to the back of this classroom, and we have Clark, who's thinking, oh my god, this guy has heat vision. Like, he's like me. This is great. So we all of a sudden we then turn around to have somebody save me from an episode I don't really like. So come on, stay, stay. Or is it save? I don't know. Whatever the subtitles want to tell me this day. So so Clark ends up going on to meeting with Lana and her horse, of course. So we have Lana that is to have Whitney's horse, Tyson, I think his name. And so Clark is to kind of put his hands by the horse, and the horse is like, no, like, not a fan of aliens, Clark. She's not a like Tyson is not a fan of aliens, and so Lana is to mention that Whitney's horse has been doing this a lot lately, and there's suspicion that it might just be like old age that might be the problem of this horse. And so it seems that they want to get rid of this horse. And so Lana's like, yeah, I don't know where to put him. And Clark is like, well, hey, I can go on and I can like take care of him and like it'll be fine. And I'm thinking in my brain, like, shouldn't Clark go on and like ask his family if this is okay for them to take on this horse? Because they have to like feed this horse. Like, horses are expensive. Come on, Clark, think it through. Think of your family. Think of your family needing to take care of a horse. Of course. Anyways, so Balana is to just be so happy that Clark is to go on and take care of this horse that really Lana should have just right then and there decided to jump Clark's bones. But no. She was just like, oh, well, that's great. Yeah. So, and then everybody is to go on and praise Clark and tell him, like, well, like, yeah, you've really won some brownie points over with Lana by taking in her horse. Like, what a maneuver, Clark, what a maneuver. So, so Clark ends up taking in the horse, and so since people are to talk about that class and how unusual that was that fire ended up happening, we have Clark that is to grow some suspicions about Cyrus, and so we go on to have Clark who meets up with Cyrus, and Cyrus is thinking that Clark is just going to make fun of him, and Clark is just like, no, like, if anybody's to be open-minded, like, I'll be open-minded, like, tell me everything, Cyrus, like, tell me what, you're thinking, that you're an alien, and so on and so forth. So, Cyrus is to hear Clark out, and so Cyrus is to mention that his parents are to want a certain like bill like every month, and they couldn't care either way, because at some point we did have Cyrus who was to be put into this mental hospital for his beliefs, and so like he doesn't want to go back to something like that. So, but Cyrus is to have this picture of this alien spacecraft, and Clark is like, oh my god, that looks just like my alien spacecraft. And so we have Clark who's really going on and believing Cyrus at this point, because it feels like he has proof, but Clark is to also ask Cyrus, is like, well, hey, where is your spaceship? And Cyrus is like, I don't know. So we have Clark that wants to desperately believe that Cyrus is to be another Kryptonian and that Cyrus could possibly have powers, to the point of him going and talking to his parents about this, both Jonathan and Martha. And so Jonathan, Jonathan and Martha are immediately just saying like, well, like you don't know if this could just be like something else besides him being a Kryptonian. And that Clark should be like very skeptical about all of this. And Clark is to even say that Cyrus is to pick out the same location where Krypton was located on a map. Because now, since we have this image that we've had since Dr. Swan's episode, we have to just keep reusing this image to just say, yeah, like he pointed out that same exact planet that used to be Krypton. So, because supposedly Cyrus gave Clark coordinates of where that planet was located, and it just so happened to be Krypton. So we have Jonathan and we have Martha who are going off, and Martha is looking at the spaceship, and Martha, of course, is to still be thinking about the spaceship that had healed her from episode 4, and that also that Helen should probably be breaking down their door to try to figure out how exactly Martha was to be revived from, of course, the last episode. And Helen isn't. It's just like, hey, this is great, she's still alive. So we have Martha who just wants to double check on her pregnancy to see if everything is okay, considering this is just an unconventional pregnancy. Because, of course, going from not being able to have a child to then having one just feels like there should be caution done. So we have all of a sudden Clark, who is at the Talon, and he, of course, is to be looking up this certain book about just kind of like mental, like psychology kind of things. And Lex all of a sudden is to make his way to see that Clark is looking up this book. Because we, like, through a lot of these episodes, always have Lex who's just like, oh, hey, yeah, you're reading up on this? Like the other episode where Clark had the men are from Venus and women are from Uranus and whatever. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus and whatever. So we go on, and so Lex ends up talking to Clark mainly about like, well, hey man, like I was to go on and offer Alana my horse's stables like free of charge, and she said no. But it seems that there was another offer on the table that she oddly said yes to. I'm wondering why, Clark. I'm wondering. Also, when thinking about it, like, doesn't Lana have her own? Oh wait, yeah, that's right. Because I'm like, wait a minute, doesn't Lana have her own stable? But thinking about it, more than likely Nell had uh sold the house, hence why Lana is now living with Chloe. And so who is now Clark's neighbor besides Lana? Because obviously Lana doesn't live there anymore. And plus, that makes sense why there isn't like the stable being used, because Lana doesn't live in that same location. Oh, I'm trying to piece it together and figure it all out. So, because it's like, well, why doesn't Lana just put it in her own stable? Because she doesn't live there anymore. Figured it out. I had to write this show's wrong, where they didn't remind me of that. So we we go on here. So we of course have uh Chloe. Clark ends up talking to Chloe, and it seems that Chloe is really jazzed that Cyrus could be this alien, as there could be possibility that this could be a unique story idea for Chloe. And Clark is just like, yeah, that like, of course, because only Chloe would have that kind of mindset. And so, but come to find out, like, Clark is to just find out more things about Cyrus. And so Clark, because we also have Chloe, who at some point is to realize that what Cyrus had possibly did could just be some magic trick. That also Cyrus was to be suspended from school for what he did, because possibly Principal Reynolds had figured out that this was some magic trick, and that this kid ended up getting kicked out for this. And so Clark ends up kind of poking holes with Cyrus to just be like, well, like, so you don't have any like superpowers, like, so why is it that you're an alien? How can you make a claim that you're an alien? And Cyrus is just to like, when he talks to Clark about it, he's just like, well, like, I don't know anything about that, but like he just tries to like do like the presidential thing where he just kind of like uh he answers the question with another question to just kind of go on and go elsewhere with the story. So, come to find out, we of course have Lex and we have Helen, and Lex ends up giving Helen the key to the Luthor mansion that gives her freedom to go anywhere in the mansion. But then at some point, we do have Helen who realizes that one of the rooms she can't go into, and she ends up asking Darius. She's like, hey, I can't go into this room. And he's just like, well, yeah, like, no one can go into that room besides Lex, and since you're not Lex, you're not going in that room. Hey, how about we go into this other room that I can show you, and you can have a good time in there? And Helen's like, no, like, I should be able to get free roam to go anywhere I effing want. So we then turn around and have Helen, who is upset with Lex, and she, of course, is to confront Lex and say, like, well, hey, like, you told me this key could get into any room here, but I can't go into this one room. What is this one room? And Lex is like, well, that's, like, my own room. Like, that's, like, can I have my own room in my mansion? And Helen's like, but I thought we were, like, gonna share everything. Because we're a couple, we're in love. And so Helen storms off. And so we have Lex go on and take Helen into this room where he ends up going on to show Helen the car from the pilot episode, and is to also go on and showcase all of Lex's secrets to Helen, to show her that he's been looking into the Kents, that there are several artifacts that he, of course, is to have here. And here's my big, massive thing here. If Lex is to have an unusual item, like that octagonal shape, that was the paperweight, that we kept calling it the paperweight, I did. Why wasn't that item in this mysterious room that only Lex can enter into? Doesn't that kind of, like, crack a big, huge hole in that whole idea of, like, why wasn't that paperweight in that room that only Lex could access? Because it didn't need to just be lying around. Anybody could just go in and be like, hey, can I look at that octagonal shape? And Lex could be like, hey, let me go into my secret room, and then I'll come back and I'll hand you this over. Plus, also, if Lex is to already in the room that he's in his office, if there's already a secret room that we realized is to be present in the episode where, like, the burglars go through that bookcase and there's all that jewelry there and all of that stuff that they end up stealing, why didn't Lex figure it out that there was a secret room behind this bookcase and then go on to use it then, instead of having this other room that is to be less secure and less secret? But that's just me. Anyways, pushing on. There's so many questions in so little time. But it seems that also Helen is to have some scandal now that she is to be tied with Lex. We, because of that, are to have Martha, who nobody wants to have her be their doctor because of the scandal that she's involved in. But Martha is to go on and schedule an appointment with Helen, because Helen is to go on and trust Helen because of Helen knowing Clark's secret, as well as knowing how unusual Martha's being alive still is. Also, if Martha had died in the other episode, how is it that her baby is still okay? So many questions in this episode. How is it that her baby is still alive? But anyways, so Martha ends up going to Helen and is to want to check up and, like, see what's going on. So, come to find out, we have Cyrus, who is to be working on this equipment that he has out in the boondocks somewhere. And so we go on to have, at some point, do we... Oh, yeah, we should get to this now. We have a moment where Lana is to have a problem with her horse. And both Clark and Cyrus are to be scrambling to try to get the vet out there to help this horse. And Cyrus is just to go on and touch this horse and heal it. So we had Clark afterwards talking to his parents and mentioning that since Cyrus has healing power, and that Clark doesn't know if Clark is to still have a healing power coming, or that maybe Krypton or Kryptonians have different power sets that he's not aware of, that maybe Cyrus can be Kryptonian. But like that ends up kind of like having so many questions. But so Cyrus ends up healing Lana's horse, and so when Lex was to talk with Clark, and Clark was to read that mental health book so he can help out his friend Cyrus, that he may think that this guy is thinking that he's an alien, and Lex didn't think anything of it. All of a sudden, when Cyrus heals this horse, all of a sudden Lex makes his way to where Cyrus lives and is to have Clark meet up with Cyrus and realize that Lex is there. And Lex is telling Clark, it's like, well, hey, yeah, like, at first I didn't believe what you were saying, but all of a sudden when I heard the story that this guy could heal this horse, man, did, like, I just decided, hey, let's go on and let's check out this Cyrus guy. But it's just too bad that he's not here. And Lex is telling, Clark that it's like, hey, if you meet Cyrus, like, tell him I'll buy him a latte sometime. So, come to find out, Cyrus, after he is to go on and heal this horse, it seems that once Cyrus's parents end up finding out, they want to go on and like put this kid in a mental hospital because they feel he's unwell. So Clark ends up going on to break Cyrus out of this mental hospital because Cyrus is telling Clark that it's like, hey, like, I need to get out of here because my family from Krypton is coming soon, and like I gotta get my signal out. And the whole thing about we of course having this guy who has a signal, like, immediately came in my brain this story that I already had that is kind of somewhat original, but it kind of like, a lot of people can go on and say that it probably feels like a Terminator ripoff because it probably feels that way. But so, like, I had an idea, and just thinking of this episode, like, is to kind of wash over me. I had an idea about a certain kind of tech that was to come from the future and was to be brought back by this thing called the signal. That a signal from the future was to be brought back, certain like future technology, and that it was to go on and take somebody and manipulate them so much into believing that like the signal is to like be the savior of the past and make this person believe that they need to go on to killing off certain people. That the signal is to just start to manipulate this person so much so into believing that like he can tell what's going to go on in future moments to make this person believe that like this signal is from the future. So, and then we go on and we have this kind of future tech like character that kills people off in a very like slasher kind of way, which I was like, man, that's kind of a really like interesting idea, but like I never did anything with it. But I thought it'd be like a cool idea to kind of play with, like a like if a like and it's almost kind of like Terminator in a lot of ways, but still, like it would just be a person from the past who was manipulated by future things and was to like have this signal help this character out from time to time. Like to me, like I think cosmetically I would have wanted him to look like Star-Lord or something along those lines. But then it would have these like future gadgets that would be just vastly different than a Star-Lord, but still. Either way, I guess it would be cool. I guess it would be kind of unique enough. Anyways, pushing on. It was a goofy idea, but I was like, man, I just want like a future tech movie that it turns into like this slasher horror film. It'd be kind of cool. Anyways, so I would probably just call the movie The Signal, because that would be like the idea, the idea. Anyways, so we go on to have both Clark and we have Cyrus, who needs to go into the school because Cyrus needs to come up with this power source for his ship. And so I say ship because it's more like a tower. So both Clark and Cyrus have to go on and break into the school, and then when they leave with Cyrus's like tech that he has, we all of a sudden are to be remet up by Kyle and these bullies that are to go on and tell Cyrus, is like, well, hey, like, nice magic trick from before, but now you have all of us, and what are you gonna do? And so they're basically telling him, it's like, well, hey, you don't have time to prepare for us now, Cyrus. What are you gonna do? And so Clark ends up going on and using his heat vision to go on and set fire to this truck. And so they're like, oh my god, this guy must have abilities, and now like we're gonna run away and be afraid of him. And so we have Cyrus that is to tell Clark, it's like, well, hey, like, thanks for the assist kind of thing. Clark is like, what do you mean? And so Cyrus is like, well, like, I understand like why you were trying to help me so much, because like you have powers and you're an alien, and so it seems that Cyrus is to know that Clark has powers, and we start to have characters here that are just like, well, hey, like, do you think that you can trust Cyrus with this secret? Because I think Pete ends up coming in and asking Clark, it's like, well, do you think that he can be trusted with your secret? And Clark is like, yeah, I think so. So, anyways, so, God, there is so much I have to just kind of comb over for for this episode, and I really didn't want to. Anyways, so we have Clark that tries to help Cyrus go to his home planet or get a signal out. And so we again have the bullies trying to prevent Cyrus from sending this signal out. And we, of course, have this very goofy moment where Cyrus is yelling out to these guys. We also have Cyrus, who throughout this whole entire episode honestly looks like Eminem from 8 Mile. He has the headphones. We also... oh, I forgot about the headphones. We had the bullies in the beginning of the episode who tear away Cyrus's headphones to realize that he's just listening to this, like, static signal, and they didn't understand, like, what that meant. And I was thinking in my brain, I'm like, well, that's actually a really interesting idea, to have somebody just be listening to headphones all the time. and it's just some signal. That actually is a cool idea, but probably not for this character. Stealing some ideas from Smallville. Anyways, so uh, maybe some character down the road would make a lot more sense. So, so we go on and uh, we have Clark that goes on to try to hold up the tower that Cyrus is on, and the car ends up breaking its chain, and so we go on to have Cyrus who's to fall out of his tower. Clark catches him, and nobody notices that Clark uses his super speed or just appears out of nowhere. So what ends up happening is that they notice that Kyle is to have a broken neck from, I guess, the chain that had snapped. So, because I guess Kyle was maybe pulling on the chain, trying to get the tower to topple over. So, Cyrus is to possibly think that this helicopter is to be the alien ship trying to get him home. And Clark is telling Cyrus that Cyrus needs to use his healing ability on Kyle to heal him here and to save him. And so Cyrus steps in and tries to do the right thing and saves this kid from this broken neck. And then Cyrus just kind of falls back because he's tired after using his power. So it seems after this moment we have Cyrus that was to have this mental breakdown, and so he of course was to go on and go to this mental hospital where, like, he may be there in body but he's not there in mind. His mind is a million miles away, and so it seems that now this character has been nullified technically, that you can't use a healing character anymore because alien guy anyways. We also had a moment where Clark was to talk to Chloe and probably Pete, and they end up mentioning that that Cyrus's parents, I think, ended up dying near the meteor shower, and that Cyrus was to be adopted because of his previous parents had died, and Cyrus, of course, was to be so young during the meteor shower that he ended up seeing the alien ship that crashed, and that Cyrus had made it up in his mind that he was an alien, even though he saw the ship crashing, and Cyrus just took that someone else's story for his, and basically Cyrus just stole Clark's story and reused it as his, that he's a Kryptonian, that he had this ship, and so on and so forth. So with that said, hopefully that ends up covering most of what happens in episode 18. Try to finally get that all out of the way, because let's go on into episode 19. Because, that's all that I really want to cover for episode 18 anyways. Just try to get that over and done with. I really did not like episode 18. It's probably not going to be like one of the worst episodes, because still there's certain ideas for other episodes where I'm just like, man, that was freaking awful. But so, let's get to episode 19, an episode that I just found entertaining, but it really wasn't much more than that. It just, in all honesty, episode 19 just feels and I'm probably gonna get crap for saying this, but I'm just being honest. Episode 19 just feels like a Lifetime episode. It just does. Uh, that's what this just feels like to me. Um, so, anyways, let's go into episode 19. So, Lana, of course, is at the Talon, and she has these three guys consistently. The main focused one is to be Andrew. And so it seems that these guys are putting alcohol in their coffee. I'm like, why not just have one and the other? But, like, we end up having supposedly these Irishmen that are mixing alcohol in their coffee. And so, come to find out, they start to get a little rowdy, and Lana is to want to ask them to leave. And we have Andrew who starts pushing Lana and pushes her so that Lana is to desperately hope that someone is going to help her. She ends up having the silent alarm, or she ends up kind of hitting the silent alarm button. And I'm thinking, like, where is Clark? Where is Clark going to be? Like, Lana didn't desperately call out for Clark, like everyone else always does in a lot of these episodes. And I'm thinking, like, Clark is going to show up, and then boom, there he is. And so, like, I'm expecting at some point also for Clark to not be there and someone else finally come in and save the day for once. So it feels like something different is to somehow miraculously happen here. But we also had Lana that was talking to Helen and in the Talon before Lana ends up going on and getting this guy who tries to hurt her. So Lana ends up talking to Helen, and all of a sudden Helen is to see this other guy. And when Lana when Helen does a double take looking at this guy because she realizes that this guy's familiar, all of a sudden this guy is to disappear. And so evidently this guy is named Paul. And we'll figure that out later on more about him. So we have Lana, who ends up getting taken down by these men. Clark arrives and he's like, "Hey guys, like police are coming. Like I'm gonna try to scare you away." And so these guys kind of take the back way from the Talon, and Clark just starts to follow him. And since Lana was so terrified via that moment, Clark goes on to try and permanently scare these guys away, to tell them, like, hey, never come in this place again, never go here again. And they're like, well, what are you going to do about it? And so Clark goes on to, of course, toss these two guys aside and then take Andrew and chuck him, and he ends up smashing into this car windshield. And come to find out, that's when we end up meeting Nancy Adams, who is like, hey, I'm going to arrest you. We're going to fill out this report. And so Nancy is to go on and want to charge Clark with assault and battery. And Clark is like, come on, like, I was just, like, defending myself, so on and so forth. And so Nancy's like, oh, okay, well, I won't arrest you, and I won't put you up on charges, but, like, I'm gonna go on and force you to do community service. And so Clark ends up going on and picking up all this trash and doing all this community service. And so it's like, I'm sorry, with Clark's, like, super speed, technically he can just kind of wrap this up in, like, a matter of minutes, right? And plus, also, it seems that Clark is doing this all by himself, so how is anybody really knowing that Clark is doing this community service? But I guess also, if Clark is to just have to do, like, a certain specific number of community service hours, then like I'm sure Clark is just kind of just thumbing through Smallville and just like, okay, here's another trash thing of trash. There's my first hour. Here's another thing of trash. Here's my second hour. Because who's gonna know? So, but yeah, so Nancy goes on to arrest Clark and want to charge him, but then she doesn't. She turns around and like, no, community service for you. But come to find out, these guys all turn around and sue Clark, and Andrew is to sue him for like $1,000,000. Because it's like, yeah, like this guy ending up injuring me, like I'm walking around with a cane and a neck brace, and now I'm going to sue Clark for $1,000,000. And so both Jonathan and Martha are like, oh my god, like we don't have anywhere near this kind of money, and like this guy is asking for this massive amount. This is crazy. So we turn around, and so Lana, of course, who is scared after this whole moment where she had gotten knocked down and so on and so forth. We have Lex, who makes his way into the Talon and is to kind of spook Lana, and she's like, oh my god. And Lex is like, oh yeah, I'm sorry. Like the worst thing that I can possibly do right now is kind of scare you based on what happened the night before. And Lana's like, no, it's fine. And like, especially for what's kind of happened to Lana in the last 2 seasons, like getting spooked like this, like should not like she should be battle hardened by now, but whatever. So we have Lex that goes on to tell Lana, it's like, well, hey, like at some point when I was in school, like I was always bullied, and so I ended up finding out this one Marine guy, or this one military guy, and I sought him out to get training. And you know what, Lana, I think you need to go on and you need to do the same thing. And so Lana's like, I don't know about that. So we have Lana who goes with Lex to get trained, and now we have like the Rocky moment where Rosenbaum or Lex is just like, yeah, give him the old 1-2. Come on, Lana. Give him the rope-a-dope. Basically, Lex is to go on and be like Rocky's trainer, as Lana is to be Rocky. So Lex is to be Mick. Yeah, he's to be Mick. So Lana is trying to hit this heavy bag, and she's like, man, like I can barely hit this heavy bag. How am I going to go on and really do anything to like a normal guy? And Lex is just like, well, like it takes more than like technique. Sometimes it takes like insight or speed, or like I think Lex ends up saying like decisiveness and speed. And so, but also Lex is to motivate Lana, and is to also say, it's like, well, hey, like, is Clark gonna need to come and save you again? Like, come on, Lana. Do it for yourself. Like, protect yourself. And so Lana's like, yeah, pat, and starts doing some kicks and all kinds of things. And so Lex is like, all right. Because we have Lex that is telling Clark, as like Clark is talking about his woes, and also Clark is asking about Lana to Lex, and Lex is like, hey, don't worry about it. She's gonna be giving us a crouching tiger, hidden dragon. She's gonna give us something like that, and then cue the fight sequence that Lana does, which is awesome. So, now we have to cover all the Bryce stuff. Urgh. So we we have, of course, Helen that is going to her job, and she continues to bump into Poe. I say that way because if anybody is to go and watch the first Urban Legends movie, there's a point where Michael ends up having Jared Leto's character, whose name is Paul, and Michael ends up saying goodbye, Poe. And by the end of this episode, when Lex ends up turning to Paul and is like, goodbye, Paul, I was like, man, if only we could have just gone on and have Michael say goodbye, Poe. Just like he did in Urban Legends. That would have been priceless. I would have been like, yeah. Call back. Goodbye, Poe. So, anyways, we have Helen that bumps into Paul as he is to mention that like, hey, yeah, Helen, I was in town on business, and yeah, I ended up seeing you, so I thought I would just kind of come by. And so Lex ends up wanting to go on and meet up with Helen, and is to all of a sudden see Paul here. And so they're all trying to think and figure out with their schedules together if they could go and have like some dinner together or something like that. And so we turn around and have Helen, who is to, of course, have trouble with her car, and so she ends up calling up Lex. And all of a sudden we again have Paul, who is like, hey, yeah, I forgot my phone at this hospital, so I went back. And like, hey, it's great that you're still here. And Helen's like, yeah, this seems kind of convenient. And Helen's like, well, I'm waiting for Lex. He's gonna pick me up. And Paul's like, well, hey, how about I go on and I pick you up? And Helen's like, no, like, times have changed, Paul. So Lex ends up coming in and realizing that Paul has kind of really been consistently with Helen, to the point of Lex saying that he has noticed that 3 times now he has seen Helen with Paul, or realized that Paul has been there at certain points, and that it feels like Paul is stalking Helen. And Lex is to also ask Paul, it's like, well, hey, I'm not going to go through this car and see that there's a spark plug missing, or that there's sugar in her gas tank or something like that. Am I, Paul? And Paul is like, well, why would you ever think that I would do that? And Lex is like, well, I think I can like size up a person pretty well. And so we, of course, go on to have Paul, who's kind of to turn in like Mark Wahlberg from Fear. And so Paul ends up going back to his place, and he ends up bashing his own head into this mirror. And so we have Lex, who also has this detective in this episode, who's Meacham. And so Lex ends up calling this Meacham guy to kind of follow Paul. And so Paul ends up going to the hospital for his face, and Paul's making the claim that Lex did this to him. And now when Lex is to make it to the hospital, we then have the sheriff who's like, well, hey, like, do you have a alibi for where you were between this hour and this hour? And Clark is like, well, yeah, I can have a ton of witnesses all confirmed that I was at home doing nothing or working. And the sheriff is like, well, that like Lex could go on and hire somebody to have done this to this guy. And that also, like, the sheriff does know that there have already been threats from Lex to this Paul guy. And Lex is like, come on, like, so there isn't anything concrete that Lex could really be charged with right now. But we go on and we see that Paul is in this wheelchair, kind of walking by Lex and like, like, I try to get you arrested. So we have Clark in this episode, and we have Clark that is trying to figure out what he's going to do about Andrew. And so Clark ends up going on to meet with Andrew in the middle of the street somewhere, where this guy has this cane and this neck brace. And so Clark is trying to say to Andrew, it's like, well, hey, yeah, like, you know what, I was trying to, like, defend myself, and, like, this whole lawsuit thing is kind of going too far, and, like, my parents can't go on and afford this kind of lawsuit. And Andrew is like, well, yeah, you should have thought about that before you, like, beat me up, Clark. So Andrew ends up going into this car, and Clark ends up using his x-ray vision and realizes that Andrew is to take off his neck brace and is to not be using his cane in this car. So why would he be using the cane anyways? So Clark realizes that Andrew is to be faking this, but Clark also has this restraining order against him from Andrew, and so Clark ends up talking to Chloe, trying to figure out how Clark can go on and try to convince whoever that this guy's faking his injury. And so Chloe is just like, well, that's a good question, but like, what like, there isn't any way to convince a jury or anything like that this guy's faking it. And so Clark ends up going on to talk to Lana about the whole case, as Clark, of course, to hear that Lana is going and taking self-defense classes, even to the point of her deciding she wants to go and take on karate. And so Clark, of course, is very worried about Lana and worried of the fact that she may go on and try to take on a fight that she can't win because she now has self-defense classes. So Clark ends up going on to meet up with Lana, and Lana, it seems, is to tell Clark, it's like, well, hey, like, how about I handle it? How about I, like, since it seems that I'm, like, I technically knew what happened, and on top of that, like, since Clark, you had this restraining order and I don't, how about I go on and I try to work things out? And Clark is like, like, I guess that makes sense. So we have Andrew that makes his way into the Talon. And so Lana is to talk to Andrew to just say, like, well, hey, like, I think it's time for you to drop this whole thing with Clark. And so immediately again, when Andrew is realizing that there's a possibility that he can go on and bully Lana again, he ends up wanting to take this opportunity. So Andrew goes on to try and hurt Lana as he throws this cane aside, and Lana ends up starting to uh, tear this guy apart and spin kicking him into this table. And so, come to find out, this guy is to reverse his claims and everything like that. And so, come to find out, Clark is here. That the sheriff is to say that Lana has a mean spin kick. But it was also kind of funny when the sheriff was to take this statement between both Lana and Clark, and the sheriff was to mention how Lana like doesn't have a good coffee. She has a great or she doesn't have a good cappuccino. She has a great cappuccino or something like that. Coffee, tea, whatever she has, whatever drink she's serving over there, that coffee, whatever she be drinking, that sheriff. So we go on into the rest of me just kind of covering a lot of this episode. So we, of course, now have to get more of the Helen story out of the way. So we have Helen that is to possibly think that Lex did go on and do this to Paul, but then Paul ends up going again to Helen and is to want to go on and say that Helen was to say that Paul was to not be a good doctor, and so that's why he stopped being a doctor. But Paul wanted to figure out some way to be in a point where he is to be better off, so that way he could go back to Helen and say, like, hey, I've improved, like, here's a different me, and hoping that Helen would take him back. But that, of course, is to still not be the case. Like, Helen still does not like Paul more than beyond him just, like, not being rich enough, him not being good enough to be a doctor. Because come to find out, Helen was to tell Lex that she found out that Paul had beat a woman before, and Helen did not want to go on and become the next victim to that. And that Helen was to cut the relationship to the quick because of that. Like, for Helen to just kind of come up with a reason to get rid of this guy. So Paul is to go on and to start to be very aggressive with Helen, and is to have Helen fight back by putting this glass and smashing it onto Paul. Then Paul ends up fighting Helen, and so Lex ends up going on to find Helen when Helen is to try to call Lex. Or Lex ends up trying to, Lex calls Helen, and Helen is to mention where she's at in the hospital to tell Lex, hey, get down here. So Lex rushes on to try and help Helen, but he comes there too late. and all the doctors are now scrambling to try to get Helen in the best condition because she's fighting for her life. So Lex then knows where Paul lives. So Lex then runs off to find Paul's place. And Lex is also calling for his private investigator, his Meacham, as well as like the sheriff going on and saying like, Lex, you better not like be any part of this. So like you better not go on and meddle with this case. So we have Lex who runs off to find Paul's place, and Clark ends up following him. And come to find out, Meacham is dead in this tub, and Lex ends up grabbing Meacham's gun. So both Clark and Lex leave before the police break in, and they're like, okay, all right, like it seems that somebody might have been in here, but we can't tell. So come to find out, Paul is trying to leave town. He's trying to go to the train station, and Lex and Clark somehow figure that out. So they chase Paul down through this train station, and both Clark and Lex separate at some point. But then it seems that Lex is somehow track where Paul is, and we then have Lex who is to throw up a gun in front of Paul, and Paul is like, hey, like, it's gonna be murder if you shoot me. And Lex is like, well, like, here's the thing. And so Lex ends up throwing Paul a gun, and it's gonna be like, no, it's gonna be self-defense. So Paul ends up trying to shoot Lex, and there's no bullets in the gun, and it's kind of like Die Hard, where Lex should have been like, oh, no bullets. Because, yeah, I'm not going to give you a loaded gun. Are you stupid? So, Lex is to be tempted to shoot Paul. And so Paul tries to kick Lex, having him fall over. Paul runs into this train to try to get away from Lex. Lex then goes on and is to start to fight Paul within this this one train car. Clark ends up going on and using his X-ray vision to find both Paul and Lex. And we get to a perfect moment where Paul is to have this axe, and he's going to take it and try to kill Lex. Clark ends up using his super strength to kind of bump into the train, so the train car just kind of wobbles. And so Paul ends up losing his balance, and it seems that Lex is to get the advantage on Paul. By then, the sheriff ends up arriving, and so Lex decides, instead of killing Paul, he's going to make a citizen's arrest. And we immediately have the sheriff is like, well, hey, if I ever see you do a crime here again. You would think the same would be for Clark. It's like, we have the sheriff that is like, I think the sheriff gets to the point where she freaking hates Clark Kent, because wherever there is a crime, Clark is always involved. And so she ends up just getting really tired with Clark right out of the gate. And the sheriff is to also say to Jonathan and Martha, it's like, well, hey, I don't know how, like, things were done before I was here, but things have changed now. Like you guys aren't going to get breaks like you had before with the previous sheriff. Like, I'm the new sheriff, and, like, I'm not going to take from anybody. So we go on by the end of this episode, and we have Clark and Lana then end up talking about the aftermath, what happened with Andrew, and so we have Lex. We have Clark and we have Lana, who, oh, by the end of episode 18, we also have the whole shooting star thing, and so I think Lana is mentioning, like, well, hey, do you think, Clark, that it's a spaceship? And Clark is just like, no, I just think it's a shooting star. Like, let's just, like, they should have said, like, hey, make a wish. It's a shooting star, technically. So, but by the end of episode 19, we have Lana and we have Clark, and so Clark ends up telling Lana, it's like, well, hey, like, just because you, like, have this self-defense training, like, that doesn't mean, and, like, Clark and Lana's like, yeah, like, I get it, but so that we get through all that, then Muddy Waters, to do all of that stuff. So really, by the end of episode 19, we go on to have Lex, who is to tell Helen that, like, he has now finally decided that they should get married. Because Lex, instead of wanting to just kill that guy, instead he wanted to turn around and just turn him in. So Lex is starting to realize that it's not, like, anyone else but Helen who is changing Lex for the better, that Lex now wants to marry Helen, and so that's the way that episode 19 just kind of ends here. Let me know in the comments below if there's any major thing that I forgot about. More than likely just some certain details about this episode. Let me know what's your favorite part so far about any of these episodes, because we've had so many of them so far. Maybe any number of these episodes may be your favorite episode. Let me know in the comments below, because, of course, I would greatly appreciate at some point comments for any one of these videos, even if it's probably to tell me that I'm not good at what I'm doing, because it is what it is. Either way, at the end of the day, I'm just going to get out of here, because, of course, as per usual, just hour and 22 minutes for this one. Good God. That's why I kind of really wanted to go on and try other things and do other series and do other shows and do other movies, so I can hopefully kind of get shorter reviews done and kind of get things done quicker, because there are certain things where I'm just kind of like, yeah, I'm really trying to, like, wait to do another one of these, from trying to wait to do, like, another one just because of the length of the time that they take. But that's probably because that's all on me, and that's how I approach these things and whatever. So either way, bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.